everybody, to another Wine and Comics pairing show. I'm Dave.
And I'm Dallas.
And today we have a very special guest, Daniel Freedman, writer of so many comics. He has written for Image. He has done the Undying Love series and Burn the Orphanage series. And for Dark Horse, he has done Raiders, Kali, which a previous guest, Renton Hawkey, brought on in a previous episode and said it was just one of the best things of the past year that he has ever read. And we'll talk to Daniel about that when we bring him on. And then most recently, Bird King. Volume 1 came out last year, and Volume 2 has just started for pre-orders. So we are going to talk about Bird King Volume 2 predominantly, but also everything that Daniel has done. So let's bring him on and get this started. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, guys. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you for making the time. I know you've been very busy recently. How has prep for Bird King Volume 2 been for you so far in terms of getting to this point, getting the pre-orders out there? And how has it been going from Volume 1 to Volume 2? And I know this is a 4-volume series, correct? So this is going to be a 1 volume a year for 4 years is the plan?
Correct. Yeah, correct. Yeah. So, I mean, Volume 2 has been, done and in the can for, I don't know, 9-10 months now. So,
Okay.
that one's done, and it's, there's a pretty long lead time on trades. It's almost a year. So, we're generally finishing the book about a year before it comes out. And then, yeah, like you said, 1 a year. It looks like November is going to be our month every year. So this November will be Volume 2, Volume 3, Volume 4, and then the full compendium, which is Bird King was always sort of envisioned as a single story. And so the volumes really are just the pieces of the whole story.
And then the film and the series. And
yeah, we'll get there eventually. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I would love, I can't even imagine what the special effects would be for the Bird King himself. That would be a fantastical thing to actually see someone attempt. And I just don't know enough about VFX to know how that would even be possible. But that is a crazy, and I know the artist isn't here, but that's a crazy cool design for the so all credit on that. It sold the book for me because I saw Volume 1 of Bird King a while back, and when I bought it, it was just the cover. I think I literally didn't even read the synopsis yet. I was just like, what is this? What is this? And I picked it up. I think I picked it up on Comixology because it was just, I was browsing. So I got the digital graphic novel first and read it through. And I was just like, yeah, it was just his artwork and the designs on that. And then we'll talk about the story because the story was phenomenal. I mean, the story is really, really well constructed.
We can just talk about the art.
In a lot of ways.
We can just talk about the art.
You really can.
Frankly, I love, between Crom and Robert, being my two kind of main collaborators, I just love these guys to death. So if you just want to talk art, we can talk art. I'm not going to.
How long have you been working with Crom?
Yeah. I'm sorry?
How long have you been working with Crom?
So Crom and I started working together in, I don't know, 16 or 17 is when we first started talking. I originally had reached out to him about seeing if he'd be interested in doing a book. He hadn't done any books yet, but he had fantastic art and quite a large following on Instagram and online. And I've been following his work for a year or two, and then I thought he'd be perfect for this fantasy story I had called Raiders. Reached out, he dug it. It's the first book that he's was interested in doing. I guess he had been people had tried to reach out to him prior, and so we did Raiders. Had a great time doing that. Great success. And then he, after we were done with Raiders, he came to me with the Bird King because he had been designing and developing the character of the Bird King for, a better part of a year and putting up art and, the whole kind of developmental process to find the Bird King's look and everything else. And so once he was kind of there and it was time to, expand the story and create Bird King's tale, he kind of came back to me, and after we had such a good time on Raiders. And so yeah, we've been working together for, I don't know, 6 years now or so. And then Robert I met in 2012, all the way back then. And I met him on Tumblr of all places, back in the good old days when Tumblr was happening. And yeah, similar story. So yeah, reached out to both of them just through social media. Connected, after chatting for 6 to 12 months and getting to know each other, decided to do a book.
Beautiful.
Nice. Amazing. And so let's actually go back to
Sure.
because you've been doing comics now. Undying. So 2012 is when you say you met Robert for the first time. 2012 was about the time Undying Love was coming out, correct? Was that
yeah, Undying Love originally came out in 2011.
Okay.
February 2011 was issue 1 of that was my first book. I had been working at Marvel prior to that as a colorist for a couple of years. That was kind of my entry into the comic book world, which was a total fluke. I am by no means a professional colorist, but it worked out for a little while.
Isn't that the same story? I think I remember listening to a podcast with you a little while ago that like editing, you kind of fell into that in a similar way, where people were just like, "Oh, hey, you've edited some things for yourself. You want to edit our stuff?" And you were like, "Okay." Like,
yeah, yeah. Well, actually, the way I fell into editing was the same way I fell into comics, which was all mostly through Tom Coker, artist Tom Coker, and he had just returned from Romania, where he had just finished directing this horror movie called Catacombs for Lionsgate and the Saw producers. It's supposed to be the next film from the Saw guys. They had this big 7-picture deal after the success of Saw. They were going to make 7 $1 million movies that were all going to be giant successes like Saw. Catacombs was the second one in line, and they did not make any others. So
no kidding.
Yeah, but Tom and I spent the better part of a year, locked in an editing bay together, working on this thing, and and he's been doing comics since the 90s. He goes back to the early Image days and doing Gen 13 and all that kind of stuff. And so when we were editing the film, we were also talking comics and stories, and I asked him to read my first screenplay that I ever wrote. And he liked it enough to ask if I wanted to develop something with him. And so that was how Undying Love came to be. And so we wrote Undying Love originally as a screenplay. And then because we could, Tom's an artist and I have an art background, and I colored Undying Love because we could. We just did the book because, we believed in the story so much, and we didn't want to see it, live and die as a screenplay where, most stories that exist as scripts never see the light of day. And there's probably amazing stories out there that no one will ever read, and we couldn't bear that. And so, we sat down for 6 months and banged out the first half of the comic before the movie was bought up, and then we got stuck in years of development on the film, and it's been a long road to hopefully, if all things go well and these strikes get resolved and everything is good, we'll probably be making the movie next year. So it's taken 12 years, but hopefully we're getting closer by the day. Yeah.
Awesome. I mean, the fact that it's still in a pipeline, like a real pipeline, where it's like, yes, we still intend to make it, not just it's in development in the sense that no one's attached, nothing's happening.
Oh yeah, no,
we've already.
No.
I know. I've heard you've had so many like false starts to it.
Yeah. It's been a roller coaster almost every year, every other year. Looks like everything's going to happen. We got new director, new actor, everything's lining up, and then there's always one person drops out because of scheduling, or this thing happens, and it's a house of cards. Everything
momentum just stops.
And so the project falls apart. Someone else comes aboard, gets redeveloped for them, and so we've gone through like 6 filmmakers now, and where we are now, I think, is by far the best situation we could be, and I can't wait, and fingers are crossed that this thing can happen.
So quick question there for you, Daniel, in reference to that, did you guys use your comic properties as a part of your proof of concept when going out to the directors and whatnot? Did you use any of that?
So no, our goal was never to use the books as pitch documents or proof of concepts. We did write it originally as a script, and then after it went out, there was some attention, but ultimately nothing happened. And like I said, we couldn't just let this story that we worked on, passionately for a year, just die. And so we said, screw it, let's turn it into a book because we can, and that's what we did. And then, ironically, the book ends up selling the movie.
I was gonna say it's kind of flipped.
Yeah.
But but it's been like the most confusing thing to people over the years, explaining to them that the script came before the book. because it's just, that's totally backwards as, you know, the way everything else works. So
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And the comic, I know there's one trade paperback that collects those 4 issues that came out. Are you guys ever, you never were able to finish the comic through Image, correct? Back in the day?
So we did not finish the comic back in the day. And then Tom got stuck working on Black Monday Murders for Jonathan Hickman for the past number of years. And so, but actually Tom and I have just started to sit down and figure out the second half of the story, because especially if the movie's coming, we really want our version of the story to be out there and to finish what we started, you know, after a decade. And so I would say that Undying Love Part 2 is coming. It's probably be a year.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. Yeah,
but it's in the works.
All right.
Awesome.
Good deal.
And that's a good idea too, because I don't know how, you know, knowing screenplays, revisions, many drafts, wherever you are now with whatever version and whatever vision, it might be very close to what the comics were originally, but at least one way or the other, you'll always have the comics to be that, you know, one pure, this was always originally what it was meant to be. This is how we wrote it. This is how we drew it. This is how it's out in the world. And then the movie exists as well on top of that. So I was wondering if that was something that you were planning, you know, to do before the movie hits.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if the movie that gets made is the anything like the most recent version that I've seen, it is remarkably close while being completely different at the same time, which is pretty fascinating. How different and the same a story can stay through, you know, all these different filmmakers, all these different writers. There's been a revolving door. You know, other writers come in, Tom and I come back in, and then someone else, and then back to us. And it's just been this thing. And so it's been interesting to see that there's been this through line through all the different versions that has always been, you know, the central story that we were trying to tell, albeit just told very differently, tonally differently, plot-wise differently, but it's always the same basic plot. So which I guess is maybe the strength of the story to begin with. It's just its simplicity. And
absolutely.
In the backbone of the story has to be pretty strong in order to take that many iterations. I mean, the thing Tom and I always, I'm sorry,
go ahead.
Yeah, no, the thing that Tom and I have always said is that you know, at least with Undying Love, we wanted to tell a simple story in a very complex world. And so it's better to do that than the other way, which is a complex story.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's a very direct story, you know, in that regard. Like, obviously there's a lot going on, but you flip open the first page and you're just like, boom, you're embedded, you're in there, things are happening. And the story, I mean, you do a wonderful job of not having to slow down really much. At least, you know, in the first half that's out there, it's like but it comes together. Like all those pieces, you're like, you don't feel lost. You don't feel like the information it's not insurmountable. It's not just like piling on and you're like, I am lost. What is this world? What is happening? It's like, you never really question it, even though it really doesn't slow down to handhold or to walk you through any particular piece.
Yeah, I mean, the you know, my decade of experience, my 1 decade of experience in Hollywood, always being you know, forced to adhere to the quote rules, has led me to really despise exposition and basically all the rules that are forced upon you. And so I think a lot of my comic book work is a real like breaking free of all of those shackles and chains that hold you down or make you boring, or kill the pace. I mean, I really like a fast pace. I like to move, whether it's a book or a movie. And so I think that's a big part of like my approach, is to like have a story that moves, because that's what excites me as an audience, you know, or as a viewer or reader. And so that's, I guess, what I'm trying to create.
Yeah, 100%. And on that note, speaking of pace, and the comic that I was unaware of before I started prepping for having you on the show and kind of looking through your body of work was Burn the Orphanage. That was one that I saw, and I was like, wait, what? This was not one that was on my radar before. And I read both volumes. And that was such a curious one to me, because I was like, what is happening in this, especially with the first issue, which is almost this complete, you're like, here's an entire, now, first off, actually, before I go any further on Burn the Orphanage, what was the inception of that? Like, where did the story come from, and what were you trying to do with it? I have my ideas of it, but I really want to hear from the horse's mouth first.
Yes, Burn the Orphanage is definitely the outlier in my my body of work so far. It was a unique project in the way it came together, the way it happened, what happened with it. It really does kind of stand out, and is quite different than everything else that I've done, at least in terms of especially the tone. So Burn the Orphanage came to be because Sina and Grace and I grew up together. We went to high school together. He introduced me to my girlfriend, and so we've been close friends since we were like 11 or 12 years old, since like 6th or 7th grade.
Sina Grace, he was the editor on Walking Dead, wasn't he?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And so when Undying Love was coming out back in 2011, and I was working with Image, and we went to San Diego Comic-Con, and I sat there all week, and back when they actually hosted creators at the booths, and I bumped into Sina, who I hadn't seen since high school, and I said, what are you doing here? He said, I'm the editor of The Walking Dead. And I was pretty impressed with that, because I had no clue that he was doing anything. I had just completely lost touch with him. And so over the number of years, because we were both at Image, and he was or at Skybound, I should say, but still Image, and so we started hanging out again, and then ironically realized we lived 2 blocks away from each other in Los Feliz, and so we just started hanging out, and as a joke, like, he would come over, and we would be hanging out and getting stoned and playing video games and watching TV and whatever. And as a joke, we started working on this Burn the Orphanage thing, just as a one-shot. Just that's why the first issue is it's a full story, or you could say it's a full story, because our only intention was to do a one-shot, and to do this kind of like video game throwback, 16-bit side scroller, brawler, Double Dragon, Streets of Rage kind of send up, and for us it was purely like a joke. Like we did it, like there was no script ever. Sina would come over, and he would be like, okay, what happens next? And we would joke around, and I would say, okay, maybe this happens. And then he would say, okay, cool. And he would go home and show up 3 days later with a completely different scene that was not what we had discussed. And because he had, his own inspirations and or a different idea. And then I would then have to take what he did and build on that. And so it became this kind of like organic, chaotic, no real guardrails, no structure, just pure silliness. I mean, really, it really is just kind of. And then so we did that, and we just had fun. It was a joke. Issue 1 came out, and it still to this day is my best-selling book.
Of course, it is. That's
naturally.
So that issue 1 sold like unbelievably well. Like people, and they got great reviews, and people really loved it. And so we said, hell, we got to do more of this, because it's both of our most popular, thing. And Casina's also a writer and an artist. He did Iceman for Marvel. He does a new Superman book coming out right now, a young adult Superman book, I think called Summer of Youth or Harvest of Youth, something. It's coming out in October. And he's done a ton of like autobiographical work. And so Burn the Orphanage is an outlier for both of us. It's very different than everything else both of us have done. Anyway, the first issue comes out, success. We say, okay, well, let's do 2 more. We'll do like a little trilogy, because each one was, the first 3 issues are essentially like double-sized, contained stories. And second issue came out, people really liked it. Third issue came out, everyone hated it. I mean, it was like the internet turned on the book. And by the time issue 3 had come out, we were already, 2 or 3 issues into the second arc, which the second volume is a 5-issue arc, 22-page issues, more standard. We thought, okay, maybe we have like an actual series here on our hands. let's try to develop this into something that can go on for multiple volumes. And so, you know, issue 3 comes out, we get ravaged, and the second volume never really recovered. And it's upsetting what destroyed the book, but like I think we were a little ahead of the curve on like having like LGBT characters in the story. And we have one of our main, you know, one of the main characters of our trio his name is Bear, and he's a big gay bear with a bear's heart, and his name is Bear, and he's just a big old, you know, he's based on like Hagar or from like Final Fight. There's always the big guy. And and so we created this character who I guess was like, according to Cena, one of the first gay characters in comics. And you know, I guess back in 2014 or something, like we were too soon, and people hated it. They, you know, we got ravaged for like, how could you put this gay stuff in our video game book? And so it was like
really video game world was in a bad place then. So I feel like you got that toxic fandom. Yeah,
it got really I mean, it was like overnight, because the first 2 issues people were ecstatic about, and then as soon as we had like a gay character express anything personal to him, it was like everyone turned on the book, and so, you know, it soured the whole thing. We didn't end up doing any more, and you know, it is kind of it's this little outlier for us, and we look back on it fondly, but it is this isolated thing that is totally random, was never planned. There was never any script. It was all just like page by page.
So in terms of that sort of genesis of the first book versus issues 3, was that consistent, or did you guys put more planning into issue 3 versus the genesis of the actual first issue?
The first 3 issues were each done just like scene by scene, because they were just like, we would like, okay, what's the story we want to tell with each of these one shots? You know, the first one is very much like a Streets of Rage throwback. The second one is, you know, I Can't Deny is essentially the Mortal Kombat movie in terms of the plot, not the game, the movie. And and then the third one was going to be our attempt to like do like a Super Mario Sonic the Hedgehog kind of like, let's go like deep into the side scroller thing, and actually do like side scrolling panels and use like 8-bit artwork, but yeah, I mean, it was I would say the second volume was a little bit more planned out, but you know, by that point it didn't matter. We'd already lost the readers.
Right.
Yeah.
With the big gay bear.
That is a shame. You were 5 years before probably the trend where it's like, now you'd be celebrated for putting all that stuff in the comic.
Totally.
I mean, it was a very surprising series, not just in, and I'm glad, like, obviously it was very video game inspired and riffing off of a lot of that, but the fact that it started as episodic, like that first issue is so like, and we're done. Oh wait, no, there's another issue, and that new issue, I'm like, okay, what this is really curious, like, because you're sort of taking the first issue was just a riff on the video games, a fun one, but mostly like a really wild, crazy one. And then the second one starts to be like, what happens to these side scrollers after the game? You know, they've done what they were essentially created to do, what they are on this video game planet. And then it's like, and I loved that you gave him like existential crisis. Of just like, I don't have a purpose in life. Like, I'm wandering. My life isn't even bad. It's just I'm totally adrift because there's no one to fight. There's no one
who else to fight.
Right. And so I thought that was, if you were going to continue it, I was like, perfect place to pick it up and way to pick it up from there. But then even, how well plotted it suddenly became after that. I was like, this is just like the evolution of that was so curious to me. So had to ask all those questions. Because they definitely came up.
No, it's super weird. Like I said, it was my highest selling, I should say, single issue. And also, like, you know, we had tons of cosplay. People show up in at conventions.
Really?
I mean, it was like, you know, for a good 4, 5, 6 months, it was really hot. People were into it. So it did kind of, you know, it was a shame when all that turned in a heartbeat.
I guess farther to fall when something goes that high, when something does that well. But
yeah, and again, not planned, like totally random. You know,
right,
it was,
right.
yeah.
Or
Yeah.
I guess you could call it easy come, easy go, right? It's just sort of like,
I mean,
it's a hit. Never, not anymore. Oh well.
Right. I mean, yeah, it wasn't something that we spent years, you know, developing and really fine tuning. It was really, you know, by the seat of our pants, random, chaotic. Who knew? I never knew what was going to be in the next panel, and it was really just a product of us hanging out. And you know, because of our relationships at Image, especially Cena's, we were able to get the book published without really any issue. So
that alone,
yeah,
this is fantastic.
Yeah. So yeah, it is what it is.
Good deal.
Awesome. And then let's move on to Raiders. That was your next one after Burn, correct?
Correct.
We went into Raiders. So, and this was your first published work, at least with Crom.
Yes.
And I'm assuming the first time you guys actually like worked together on something. Now, was this, unlike Bird King, was this your story that you brought to him, or was this also like a germ of an idea that Crom had?
So Raiders, I did bring to him. I brought him like a full kind of breakdown of originally it was going to be a 4-issue miniseries. And so it had been broken down into 4 issues and outlined. And so that one I did bring to him pretty fully formed in its narrative.
All right. And was it published as just a single graphic novel, or was it released as individual issues first?
It's just the one trade.
It is. Okay.
With Raiders, I kind of switched jump publishers and I went over to Dark Horse. And it's kind of my home now. And so Dark Horse felt strongly that the book would perform better as a trade than a 4-issue mini. And you know, coming off the Burn the Orphanage experience of, you know, when your floppy sells really well, it's awesome. But when your floppies don't sell really well and they sit in the warehouse for years and they start accruing debt, it's you know, I have been happy to essentially change formats to just the trades. I don't foresee myself really doing floppies maybe ever again. Just the business model of it. You know, unless you're a known quantity and you could sell, you know, 20, 30,000, if not more copies of your floppy, it's just not really worth it.
Right. And fewer chances, unlike Burn the Orphanage, where it's like every floppy is a chance for it to go bad. So it's like in this case, it's like, here's the volume. It survives or dies on its own. It's not 4 chances to survive or die. It's just the one. So I suppose that's kind of a plus. And with Raiders, one question I had when I went through Raiders, I noticed there were already in the back matter of that book some sketches for Bird King going on. Is there any connection between the 2 books by any chance?
No, there actually isn't. I've been getting asked this a lot because people have been, or this one guy pointed out that the necklace in Raiders looks very similar to the jewel on Bird King's chest. And people have been wondering if there's some kind of connection. And I mean, the only connection is Crom. It's just
Same artist. That's it. Yeah, he draws
so there's no connection. They're completely isolated from each other than both being fantasy books, and they're drawn by Crom. So,
okay, all right. I did love though that the one, not a connection between the 2, but the one thing that I really liked about Raiders and Bird King, I believe I can say this without giving anything away about either, but how they both sort of flip. So in Raiders, you're basically following the older, wiser. For most of the book, it's really more about the older, wiser warrior in Raiders, and then you have the younger one, but it's more that you follow for a certain bit. But it's really more about the older one dealing with something that happens, and finding his fate in that. And Bird King almost flips that, and it's more about the younger one dealing with something that happens and finding their fate. But the relationship between the 2 primary protagonists is very similar, but then flips that in its which POV are we really following once the story gets going. So yeah, I don't know if that was something that was intentional or that like that you noticed about the two works between them. But I actually liked that.
No, I actually haven't thought about that. Nothing there intentionally. I mean, I have heard people ask if, like, you know, did Markin somehow survive and become the blacksmith and Bird King? And like, no, right. He died.
No
spoilers.
Right.
But so yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about that. I hadn't prior. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think maybe just for me, age and where people are at in their lives, you know, based on their age, has become more resonant and relevant. Especially, I have a lot of younger siblings, and so seeing them grow up and go to college and enter the world and how different everyone is, and you know, even if you grow up and have the same experiences, you grow into completely different people with different desires and interests, and that's just, I think, been interesting to me, and then maybe has been creeping into the work, the you know, age and where people are at in their lives based on their ages.
Right. All right. Well, let's get right into Bird King proper, because that's what we're here to talk about. So Bird King, let's talk about Volume 1, because Volume 2 is not out yet, though, folks. Bird King Volume 2, as we mentioned at the very beginning, is up for pre-order right now. There will be the code and a link to go find it down below this video. So definitely check that out. But Bird King Volume 1, Dallas, do you want to start us off? Actually, I've been talking too much. So do you want to start us off with thoughts on Bird King Volume 1?
I will say this. Going back to our previous conversation, the artwork, that cover, it was so reminiscent for me for a lot of the stuff that I was attracted to in childhood. It had that sort of horror whimsy, which is just my bag all day long. I'm a horror whimsy kind of guy. Any sort of necro-romantic characters, as I like to call them, that you plaster in the world, I'm probably going to dig into it. The story for me, guys, the story is really just the kind of thing you do. I wanted to sit with a glass of wine and just sort of, you know, flip through this world. And I will say your ability to weave that sort of whimsy and horror is really satisfying. And you can tell you have a cinematic eye. Like, it's clear you have a cinematic eye. Like, if I read this book and you asked me what this guy's occupation or trade was, I would say, oh, he's a fucking editor all day long. That's an editor. That is a film editor right there. He is directing my eye, directing my experience, and crafting it. So,
well, you know, we accidentally jumped over Kali. So we might take a half step back to Kali, just say, like, that is something in the writing of Kali as well that was very similar in terms of, you know, I don't know, between you and Robert and you and Crumb, it's possibly the working relationship, like how the ideas flowed and how the scripting to the art and back and forth. I'm not sure if there was any difference between the two, but in both cases, they're very cinematic, literally just in the structure of the whole thing, like how the whole thing plays out from moment to moment, from beat to beat, how the camera, quote unquote, the camera moves. Kali especially, that comes across, but even with artwork like Crom, which is not as how bad, is not as, like, Robert's art has this almost like verisimilitude to it, where it's like, it's very gritty, it's got this very solid real world feel to it, whereas of course Crom's is very much in it on another part of the spectrum in terms of art. But both of them still visually, it moves, and we talked about pacing just a moment ago in terms of your writing, and the pacing just has this very, very cinematic feel in both cases. I guess that's a good first question. Is that something, you come from a little bit from a film background, is that something that just feeds into, even when you're trying to break the rules and whatnot, is that still something that you find very much influences how you write things and how you break down story?
Yeah, I think so. I think, like I said before, pacing is important for me, and it's something I really think a lot about when I'm writing. And, you know, the thing that I hate most in books and TV and film, anything, is people sitting around talking. There are, of course, scenes where people are sitting around talking that are fantastic and amazing, and they don't need anything else. But, you know, when I look at, like, you know, 90% of what's on film and TV these days, and even what's in, you know, more than half of the books I pick up, it's people sitting around talking, telling the story verbally. This happened, that happened. Okay, we're going to go do this thing. Now we're going to cut to the scene where they talk about what happened instead of seeing it.
Yes.
And so for me, I like when the story is experiential, when you get to participate in it. And I think for me, what I would break that down to is just action. Like the genre that I'm most interested in, on the surface, it might look like sci-fi or fantasy, or these days mostly fantasy. But for me, all of it is action. It's all action storytelling. Everything I do, you know, going back to Undying Love and even BTO. For me, I consider myself like an action writer. Like, that's what I'm interested in, is action, storytelling through action. And yeah, my film editing background is 100% heavily influences my storytelling, because for me, I see it in cuts. I see it I see the pictures, and it not just the images, but how they cut together. And how they cut together is what creates that feeling of space and time, and that you feel like it's, for me at least, I think it feels like it's alive in this living, breathing world. You know, I love world building, but like I said, I hate exposition. And so I would rather live in a world, explore a world, move through a world than explain it.
Absolutely.
And, you know, Kali has no explanation whatsoever. Bird King, you have a little bit more context for what's going on, but Bianca, you know, our hero is a fairly young, naive, and you know, for all intents and purposes, ignorant person who's been sheltered from what's really going on. And so half the story is her figuring it out as the reader is figuring it out. And so for me, I've always found that, you know, when you get to experience a story versus be told a story, it's just that much more engaging. And I think the reader, there's a lot more for the reader to connect with because they're of the experience. And it's always interesting to me whenever I read, like, you know, I mean, both Bird King and Kali have been heavily, you know, reviewed very positively, but there's always those couple of reviews that are always like, I didn't get it, they didn't explain it, this is stupid. And it's like, well, maybe
I hate that review. I hate that response.
Right.
It wasn't explained enough for me. Oh,
yeah, they didn't tell me how to feel.
Yeah.
You know, which is always the worst thing. Then people say, they literally will say, I didn't know how I was supposed to feel.
It drives me crazy.
Well, that sounds like a good
you're
story.
like, I don't know how you're supposed to feel. Like, however you feel is how you feel. Like, you react to the piece. However, like, not every person's going to react the same way either. So it's not. Yeah, I mean, even if you're trying to manipulate people to do it, like, you know, in a movie, they do it through music sometimes, or through, yes, that heavy-handed, like, this is sad, we're going to tell you how sad this is, and then play the sappy music, and, like, there will be no mistake about it, this is the sad scene.
And then the character will turn to the camera and say, aren't we all just so sad at this sad thing that happened? You know, I'm just so
look how sad
right
life is. Yeah.
And and that's when I pull my eyes out.
But that's the thing. Even when they do that, not every person's going to go with it. Not every person, because they're not going to feel it. And or someone like you particularly, I feel like me and Dallas are probably pretty close in the same camp. But like, you actively rebel against it. So they're like, this is how you feel, and you're like, no. Like, now that you've told me, like, fuck that, I'm not doing it. I'm not gonna feel that way.
I also hate easy answers. Like, I think a good story has some, you know, some moral quandaries in it. Like, if you as a reader never feel emotionally or like morally challenged in the story, like,
there you go.
You know, does the character do anything that you find questionable, or you know, there's so, especially in the film world, there's so much emphasis put on like likability. Is this character likable? And you know, I always throw my hands up, and my personal belief is that likability doesn't mean anything. What matters is if you understand the character. And if you understand where the character's coming from or what they want and why, then that's what makes them interesting and engaging, not because they're like charming or, you know, have good jokes or have a dog. You know, how many times have characters been, you know, write in a dog to make the character likable, give them a dog, you know, that kind of shit. So
right.
But anyway, back to your question. Yes, for me, it's all action storytelling. You know, as much as I love the written word, I consider myself a visual storyteller. You know, I've been an editor for going on like 12, 13 years now. And so all of that, you know, heavily influences my writing and my approach to story. And you know, the way I write my comics is like, you know, I write pretty detailed scripts panel by panel because that's the storytelling to me. That's the actual writing. You know, the dialogue is only 10, 15% of the storytelling. And so, you know, Robert and Crom couldn't be more different stylistically. And yet I'm writing very similar scripts for them, and they're both, you know, interpreting them and through their own lenses, and then doing what they do. But I am supplying them both with the, you know, these are the shots, these are the cuts, these are the angles, these are the moments, these are the emotions. And that definitely comes from my editing background.
Yeah. And just so the viewers know, let's do just a quick non-spoilery pitch of Bird King. Like, what is the story of Bird King? So, you know, it does take place in a fantasy world. So there is that world building element, though, as we've already mentioned, it really, the story just goes, and Bird King is definitely a story that demanded more moment-to-moment explanation than most of your previous stories did. But even then, it's you're very good at like only what's absolutely necessary. You know, it's like there's a drop of a sentence here, especially from the older mentor. But basically, you're coming into this world that used to be one thing. We don't really know what it used to be, but there is a lot of suggestions that it used to be different than it is currently. But it's under the shadow of this evil being, if I'm pronouncing this right, called Agul.
That works. Yeah.
And there you go. Agul. And Agul is, we're not 100% certain where he came from exactly, or how it came to be this bad. But we follow these blacksmiths, an older, very experienced blacksmith and his young protege, Bianca, who becomes our protagonist. And the world is oppressed by Agul, but the blacksmiths have this sort of pseudo freedom from the rest of the oppression, kind of a handshake deal. So they're oppressed but not oppressed. But as we learn in volume 1, but as we quickly learn in volume 1, that can be like, that is subject to review on a daily basis, and is quickly challenged. At which point the action of the volume starts, because that pseudo freedom is challenged. And Bianca winds up in a position where she has to find her way on her own with this figure called the Bird King, which is all part of this world's past, though we don't really know. It's an important figure of the past, but we don't know why, we don't know how. And he's a silent figure. So you kind of have this, the only comparison I could think of, though I feel like this setup gives me hints of something that my brain was not making a connection, but like the Iron Giant kind of a thing, where it's like you have that figure that is powerful, but is not informative. Like they're not going to help you figure, like the child protagonist is still going to have to figure everything out on their own. So we're following her POV. So as we mentioned just a moment before, we're going in with this naive, or you could be a little negative with how you say it and say ignorant, but both words work. Naive, ignorant young person who only knows yay much about the world, but now very quickly has to both travel with the Bird King, and the Bird King is this creature or this figure that she both has to protect and be protected by in turn. Was my takeaway on that. So that is your setup for the Bird King world and how you're going to enter all of this. So having said that, one question I wanted to ask you, because you had mentioned that this was a seed of an idea that Crom had, but he was having trouble cracking it, so he came to you. From your POV, what was the most challenging aspect for you to crack in this story when he brought it to you?
I don't know if any of it I would say was challenging. When he came to me with the character, I mean, so when Prom came to me, he had a couple of the characters designed and a very loose idea for a story, which we ended up kind of redeveloping. But when he came to me, he had Bird King fully designed, he had Bianca fully designed, he had Thornir, you know, her master blacksmith, and a ghoul. And so those are the four characters that he kind of came to me. And so when he came to me, I was given, you know, Bianca and Thornir, there's Bird King over here, and then we know that there's a bad guy named a ghoul, a necromancer who's kind of taken over their domain. And so that was sort of where I started. And, you know, Crom and I talked for, I mean, I don't know how many dozens of hours, just every little detail, you know, we talked about Bird King for weeks, just, you know, can he talk? No, he's mute. Okay, can he communicate? And just really figuring out the characters in terms of how they behave, how the world works, you know, what the magic is. And then from there, I really just started to build on those, you know, couple characters. So you know, it was interesting. It's like almost like given like a writing prompt. It's like, okay, here is your characters. Now tell a story with these characters. And it very, you know, we started working on this in 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic. You know, it was like Crom and I's COVID project. We were both, you know, Raiders came out in 2020 in June. So right at the height of, you know, COVID mania. And it was, you know, the worst time in the world to release a book. And we really just made peace with the larger, you know, events happening in the world, and we just let it go out. Right. And we're very, very happy to see that it still found an audience and it continues to find people. But, you know, we were sitting there after Raiders, you know, a little bit defeated after the release being so muted because of, you know, the larger events happening. And so Bird King was really born out of like, we're stuck at home, we can't go anywhere, and we just want to make something. And at the time I was reading a fantasy series that changed my whole conception of storytelling and view on language and literature. And that was the Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. This is a 4-book series, Shadow of the Torturer.
Sorry, the sound went out again. What was the book?
Oh, the Book of the New Sun.
Book of the New Sun.
Shadow of the Torturer, Claw of the Conciliator.
Oh, Dallas, yeah. If you haven't read that, that's an experience.
Sword of the Lictor.
That is a fucking experience.
Yeah, I mean, just unbelievably amazing book. And then there's a 5th book that's like a sequel called Earth the New Sun. That's really great. It's basically a 5-book series. And it was my first time reading Gene Wolfe, and I mean, I've just fallen in love with Gene Wolfe since, and I just, you know, yammering to get every book of his I can. And so I think the pandemic and everything going on with that, and then what I was getting from this book really inspired a lot of Bird King.
I can see that, actually.
Yeah. I mean, and aesthetically, tonally, and thematically, I mean, Crom and I have always long agreed and fancied ourselves fans, or I should say, maybe this will put it better. The two godfathers of Bird King and Raiders, to a lesser extent, are what we call the two Miyazakis, which would be Hayao Miyazaki and Hidetaka Miyazaki. And so that's Dark Souls and Princess Mononoke. And so if you slam those together, that's what Bird King is for us tonally. So that's where you're getting that horror whimsy. You know, you're getting the Dark Souls vibes, but you're also getting that Princess Mononoke, you know, Miyazaki, Totoro, and the kind of
adventure,
fun, cute stuff. And
makes sense. Yeah.
And so I would say stylistically, you know, tonally, Bird King isn't very similar to like Book of the New Sun. It's much more tonally, you know, connected to Dark Souls and Mononoke and that kind of thing.
Okay.
I can see that. Yeah. I can definitely see with Gene Wolfe and the New Sun, your love of not spelling anything out. And so I can see why you took to that, and where it's like, it's all in, like, it's peppered, it's in there. And there's,
it's a puzzle. It's a puzzle.
Right. And people have different,
you have to read the whole book.
Interpretations. Yeah.
Right. And you have to read the whole book before you have all the information. And then you have to go back and put it together. And for me, I know that that's off-putting to some readers because it's work. They have to actually work.
Right.
But for me, that's what gets me engaged and thinking about the story when I'm, going to work or going to the bathroom. It's like, the thing is always turning in my head and I'm trying to think about what the hell's going on or why did this thing happen. So I really like being engaged. And that also comes from, the Dark Souls influence of like, telling your story through little lore excerpts, and not spelling anything out. And you just, so I like the idea of really peppering in all of I'm peppering the story and the backstory. And I hope I'm giving the reader all the clues and just little bits of info they need that by the end, they'll be able to, once they have it all, be able to put the whole thing together. So we'll see how successful.
We'll find out.
Yeah.
I mean, so far, at least from reading volume 1, it's enough to, again, not kind of similar with what I mentioned about Raiders, like you don't feel lost. So even though you don't know what's going on, like you don't have enough information yet, you're still like, okay, but I'm following what's happening and why in broad stroke, like I know why Bianca's doing what she's doing and why this adventure is about to happen. What that means in terms of the history, like, we don't know anything about Agul. We don't know anything about the history of the world quite yet. Just these hints and pieces. Like we know the Bird King has a history. We just don't know what the heck that is. We just know he has been around, even though he has not been active or activated, however you might want to say that, for quite some time. But yeah, we don't know what he is yet.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I just blanked on what I was going to say.
No.
I think so. For me, I think what always is the most important thing is does the reader want to know what's going to happen next?
Yeah.
And so my whole goal with volume 1, which was designed to be a slow burn, it's a much slower entry into the world. Bird King is also my first, long form story. And for me, it was actually really exciting to actually have more time to slow things down, to not have to fit, the whole story into 100, 120 pages. And so to actually to have some more time in the world and live in it and get into it and then build up that engagement. And as long as the reader at the end of volume 1 wants to know what happens next, I feel okay with everything else. Like everything else will come. I just had to hook. My goal was I just had to hook the reader. That was the intention with volume 1. So.
And I will say a testament to your pacing, your use of onomatopoeia. Maybe Dave mentioned this, I don't recall, but your use of the onomatopoeia.
Nope, you're the first. You're the first.
Throughout volume 1 it definitely helps the pacing because it keeps the engine and the inertia moving. It's also very satisfying. So yeah, very good job with the placement of the onomatopoeia for sure. So sometimes I can get a little heavy-handed
weirdly, I think that comes from
too heavily.
I think weirdly that comes from the editing too for me, my film editing, because so much of editing is sound. People don't understand that like 90% of what you're seeing on the screen you're actually hearing. And if you don't actually hear it, you don't see it. There's all kinds of weird stuff going on with your brain. And so
I saw
how do I bring sound effects to the printed page, and use them in a similar way for impact. So that's what that was.
If you ever decide to do a staged play, a staged reading of this guy with a Foley, let me know. I'm there.
It's funny. I had an eye-opening experience not too long ago. There was a Vietnamese action film that martial arts action film. It was called Choi Lon. And I was really looking. It had one of my favorite martial arts action stars, and I was really looking forward to it to come out. And it ran afoul of Vietnamese censors, to where to this day it's never officially been released. But a work print with no sound design got leaked. And I watched an entire action movie with no sound effects.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is so bizarre. Watching, you're watching, it's excellently, but you have to rewire your brain to allow for it, because you don't realize how much those sound effects were selling every single hit, blow, move. Even sometimes you miss the whoosh of the kick or something like that, where you're like, and it can be a subtle whoosh. It doesn't have to be like a stupid, loud whoosh, but you start to realize how much might have been like a really almost volume part of all these movements and actions and dynamic movements of the camera, and without the sound effects, you watch these the choreography and the cinematography and even the editing between the moves is spot on, but I almost had to watch it in a different way to see, oh no, that is spot on, damn it, but it's not working. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, next time you catch a Transformers or Michael Bay movie on TV, just mute it and watch it. And it won't make any sense. It will not make any sense. You will have no clue what's happening. It's just a flurry of images. They're totally disconnected. But when you hear it, it all melts together. I mean,
that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So all the criticism that it is just like a whirlwind of things that, like, sometimes the hoity-toity critics will get on those movies for being like, it's a jumble of images that don't make sense. And if you put it on mute, they're like, oh no, they're right. Yeah. It is just a jumble of images, but for some of us, we can take it, we can take in that sound and translate. I did want to take another half step back to Kali and make it, because we were talking about, you mentioned how you really like the moral quandary, like give the audience a bit of a moral challenge, as well as so Kali was a big so to take we're gonna take a full step back. So with Kali, there was it came on my radar. This was a book that a previous guest on the show, Renton Hawkey, he brought in. He's an artist in his own right. Hey Renton. So we're gonna shout out to him. And by the way, he does, like, Kali was like, he was obsessed with this graphic novel, and he brought it on. And I remember he came on and he was like, I am so disappointed in comics Twitter because no one is talking about this book. Like, no one on social media is doing it. and he was like, I thought they were tastemakers. They are not, because no one's talking about this book, and this is the book of the year. And he brought that on. And so after he pimped that to us, I was like, well, shit, I got to look at this book. I gotta go get a copy and take a look at what he's talking about. It is everything we've talked about before about your pacing. You're not spelling anything out, just you're going and you're going to piece it all together. You're going to give enough information, but people have to go on the journey with you to get that information. And it is a revenge tale, and revenge tales are always somewhat, there is a moral quandary that is already just sort of baked in terms of how much can you root for someone causing all this death and destruction? Like, is it fully justified and earned? And everyone's mileage is going to vary a little bit. Like, that's something we have to decide, like, ooh, well, what is the revenge about? Is this, are the punishments fitting the crimes, et cetera, et cetera? But with Kali, and I won't, where you take it in the end, you gave it this extra level of, oh shit, I have to rethink this whole fucking
exactly
at this point, and what I think about it, and how okay I am with all of this. And that was a very was that something that when Kali started, when you started not just the graphic novel, but like writing the script, did you know you were going there? Was that the story you were telling right from the get-go, or did you surprise yourself with that?
That was a surprise. Kali came about in a interesting way, or it didn't come out in an interesting way, but I wrote it it came to me very like hot and ready. Like it was fully formed, and I wrote it in like, I think 3 sittings over maybe 2 months. And so like the first 3 issues I wrote essentially in 1 sitting, and then the 4th part, because it was broken down into 5 issues originally, even though it was released just as the single trade. But it was originally broken down into 5 issues, and I wrote the first 3 straight, and then the 4th, and then the 5th. And that big twist comes in the 5th issue, and so it was a surprise to me. And I think, just after the, all the violence and mayhem that is in the first, those first, 3.5, 4 issues, I've written quite a few revenge stories over the years, and as I've gotten older and more emotionally mature and whatever, I've started to question that violence a little bit more. And when you watch the John Wick movies, like, you're 100% on board with Wick. Like, they killed his dog. 100%. That's all that matters. And he can kill 7,000 people because they killed one puppy, and that's okay. And I agree, it works. But when I was working on Kali and some other stories, I just started to feel more and more that, like, these are bad people. Like, anyone that can go and shoot and murder like 70 people is not a good.
Yeah, there's a problem there.
Yeah, and not that the people she's killing are good. I mean, they're just as bad, if not worse.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I just started to feel like there needed to be something more to this. It's too easy and simplistic if it's just a murder rampage that, she kills all the bad guys and then rides off into the sunset. It just felt hollow and empty and bland to me. I mean, I just wanted, Kali for me is such like an embodiment of anger and rage, and those emotions are mask and hide, deeper pains and things like that. And so I knew all along that there was something else going on, and the way the story starts, it starts after the betrayal of the gang, and so you're getting the backstory of what happened with the gang, broken into little pieces, and there had been this thread of like kind of just organically this whole thing of like her remembering what had happened before because she was so angry now and in such a fit of rage that she had kind of, that was what was driving her. And so to have her actually reflect and remember what came before and how this all started, and then, but not to turn on her at the same time, but to find her. For me, it was my attempt to kind of try to locate her humanity and give her an arc, have her actually go through some kind of change and evolve and find an end to her rampage. Because the story's so linear, it's almost like nonstop, it's almost real time. And I knew, how does this end? What is at some point she's either going to have to die or something's going to have to happen, because how does this rampage end? And so, yeah, that's all kind of just what came out of it. And then I wrote Kali in 2016. And then I didn't really touch it. And it took Robert 7 years to draw it. So, I wrote it in 2016, and then I just waited very patiently.
I mean, looking at the art, it's surprising, but not surprising.
Yeah.
It's like 7 years. You're like, whoa, 7 years. But you look at that art, you're like, no, that took 7 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, it took us a really long time, and, hopefully the next one doesn't take quite as long, but Robert also is a full-time video game art director. So comics for him are a pure hobby. That was another, it didn't take him 7 years of drawing every day. It was 7 years of him finding the time to sit down and draw.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I again, like, Kali came so hot and ready that and I couldn't bring myself to touch it after I had written it. Normally I'll rewrite the script 100 times, develop it, get feedback, all this, you go through the whole process. But Kali just was like totally different. It came out, I just let it be what it was in its first, iteration, the initial surge of whatever you want to call it. And, and then I let it be that. And, for those 7 years, I would have dreams where Kali would, kick in my bedroom door and pull me out of bed and throw me out the window and just beat the hell out of me, demanding to finish the book. And I'd be like, it's on Robert. And,
it's on him.
I'm the one.
Go menace his dreams. Get out of mine.
Yeah.
Wrong guy.
Although there's another book or movie there. Just FYI.
This is your Wes Craven's New Nightmare, right? The meta version for the Kali sequel. All right, well, let's circle back to Bird King, and let's talk about what we paired this bad boy with, because I think we're at that point. So
actually, do you want to? you want to get into Bird King 2 now, or you want to do the wine first?
We can get into Bird. I mean, we haven't read Bird King 2.
No, I mean just sort of
we can't talk too
sort
much
of
about it.
The pitch and sort of the soft sort of tease from Daniel.
Yeah, is there, outside of it being the continuation and volume 2 of 4? Yeah, what's your what do you have?
What can we expect? What can we
volume
expect
2 specifically?
I would keep it simple and just say that volume 2 is the true beginning of Bianca and Bird King's quest into this world. You know, we'll see how far they make it in volume 2, but what I can tell you is that they'll make it probably a lot farther than you think.
Interesting.
Right.
So yeah, I don't want to reveal too much other than
right.
I would call volume 2 the road book. You know, it's the road part of the story where they're traveling and they're on the road and they're moving through this world. And they're, at least Bianca's seeing a lot of things for the first time.
All right.
And we will learn more, albeit in a kind of opaque and hidden way. So, but I definitely will be giving you a lot more pieces of the puzzle, and hopefully some great action scenes too. I think volume 1 was a little light on big action, and that was because there were other dramatic things that needed to be handled. But volume 2, I would say, is where the action really kicks off.
Gotcha. Yeah, there were heavy moments in volume 1, which was more because it was the setup and sort of the emotional traumas that kickstart the whole thing.
We on ramp. Yeah.
So volume 2, the adventure begins. We'll just put it that way.
Adventure begins. Boom.
There you go.
Good line. All right.
All right. Why don't you start, Dave? I'm gonna need to run to the kitchen and grab the bottle real quick here. Actually.
Okay, you go grab the bottle. I'll talk about mine real quick. So Bird King for me, we talked about how it had that Miyazaki, the both Miyazakis, the Miyazaki adventure. But speaking of like Princess Mononoke and that type of a thing, so there is a lightness to it. There is a adventure, like where you're just like, it's not a heavy read in terms of heavy is not the right word. I've got to find the right, because it does also have that horror element. And then there are, as I literally just like a minute ago said, like it has heavy moments. So I probably shouldn't contradict myself here, but regardless, the adventure part is still something that has a whimsy to it. And then Crom's art is both, you've got that sort of Mignola-esque horror element to it, but then there are also, there's a greater, trying to like Michael Avon Oeming, if I'm even pronouncing his name right, I don't know if I am, or like a Tintin kind of a thing where you've just got also this very adventure cartoon style, but melded with this much darker, heavier, more horrific style. So for me, I needed to find something that was not too heavy, not too deep, not too dark, but at the same time had something serious going on with it. So I couldn't just go for something easy drinking. It's certainly not, your porch sipping kind of a beverage. Like I needed something that was like, okay, maybe a little lighter in color, maybe a little lighter in body, something that is nice to drink, but at the same time has a complexity to it that is going to challenge you, has something that you do have to think a little bit about it while you're drinking it. Like it's not just your brainless sipper. So for me, you could go a couple of different ways. I think you can go with the two types of wine that I think work really well with this are either a Grenache-based blend, but it needs to be blended with a little something heavier to give it that complexity, or a Mourvedre-based blend, where the Mourvedre alone then needs to be blended with something a little lighter to bring it back. And I think either way, you wind up with something that works. I went with a Grenache Petite Syrah blend. So Dallas will be familiar with this one. This is from a LA-based winery called the Blending Lab here. It's one of our favorites. And I thought of this one mostly because, Grenache is one of those grapes where on its own, it does become a little too porch sipper. It can be just a little too fruity, a little too simple, just not interesting enough on its own. Not always. you got to find a winemaker that's really doing something interesting, like for the winos out there, like a whole cluster type fermentation where you're adding all the twigs and the seeds, and you get that woody element to go with it. But otherwise, you need something like a Petite Syrah, which is a very heavy, dark, inky. I mean, it's literally like almost, if you make a single varietal Petite Syrah, it can come out in the glass looking like pitch black. It is like a dark motherfucker. So this is a 75% Grenache, 25% Petite Syrah. So it's got just enough in there, but it still comes out. It's got that adventurous lightness to it, but then with that touch of complexity and heavy-handedness that's in the back end on it. And together, this just worked gorgeously with me. I would say find something like this, or again, Mourvedre based blend. Don't do a pure Mourvedre; those tend to be a little too much, a little too heavy. But if you can find, usually Mourvedre is blended with Grenache and Syrah. It's called a GSM blend. Usually, when they do that, the M being the Mourvedre. Find one where the M is the predominant part of the blend, and then you got a little bit of GNS thrown in there as well. And that, for me, this was my baby for the Bird King.
All right, so my sort of rationale into my pick here, I originally thought I was going to go with the red, because I wanted something sort of that fits the mood of this sort of, epic. There's this sort of epic of empire backbone to the Bird King, which, I always appreciate. And whenever I think of that, I think of either a mead, a cider, or a nice homely red wine. And my goblet as I, move through the
Getting
world.
into the fantasy
exactly,
things.
Exactly. But there's a crispness owing to your pacing, actually. I think in large part to your pacing, where it felt very light. The world doesn't actually feel that heavy, mostly because of the POV of Bianca and being the sort of protagonist. And she is just so curious about the world and her place in it. And so she's stimulated. She's clearly very stimulated, and she wants more stimulation. So I decided it should probably be a bit lighter to kind of complement that. So I also didn't want to go with a white because that seemed a little too, it just doesn't fit for me. So I went with an orange. I went with an orange wine. Now, if you know anything about the orange wines, there's a whole skin contact kind of placing for the wine. It's an organic wine. It is a Sicilian wine. The grape is called Carato Bianco. They let this sit with the grapes for a very long time. It has a really deep sort of minerality. And when I think of these sort of epic worlds, you think of stone, you think of steel, you think of iron, you think of, rare gems and jewels and things of that nature. So the idea of that minerality being in the backbone and on the back of this wine made sense for me. Where's my other note here? It has a very fresh acidity, and this character, at least the protagonist, she's very fresh. It's very sort of new take, I think, on that on that specific character type. So I chose the where are we here? The Fabrizio della Catarato. It is an orange wine. It is very crisp. It does sort of veer into the cider kind of realm, which again goes with this whole.
Does it have a little bit of like natural sparkling?
It has a little bit of absolutely. There's some grit to it, as you will find with skin contact orange wines. I think it's fantastic. It really is. Generally, I'm not an orange wine guy, just to drink an entire bottle. Not that I'm going to drink this entire bottle, but I am. So yeah, unfiltered Colorado.
Held that bottle up. It looked pretty close to gone. I hate to break it to you.
Mind your business. Mind your business, kid.
Oh wow! All right, and getting to this end. So now Daniel is horribly allergic to wine, so he is not going to partake of the wine with us today. But did you bring? Let's start with the book that you wanted to bring. That is something that you're either into right now, or is just near and dear and precious to you, and has been for a long time.
Yeah, I actually had a hard time picking one book. I'm currently reading the Doctor Strange Fall Sunset Tradmore book. I just bought the trade of that, and it is beyond amazing and gorgeous. But I couldn't bring myself to recommend a Marvel title, so I had to go somewhere else. And so something else I recently reread was this book, Ancestor, by Malachi Ward. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar.
Malachi Ward.
I am not.
Malachi's work.
No.
So the Image put this out. He is I think one of the most interesting creators. I'll admit he's actually is a friend. And I will even further admit that I adapted one of his short stories into a short film. But all that aside, I just reread Ancestor. And this book came out in 2017. 2017 from Image. It's a single graphic novel. It collects, I think it's 4 issues, and originally published in Island magazine, which was Brandon Graham's like short story collection thing. And Malachi's done a number of graphic novels, a lot of short stories, and he also works a lot on Black Hammer and Prophet back in the day. And he is I just think Malachi has a really interesting voice. He is someone who is, you will never find anything conventional or generic or standard about any of his stories. And not only that, but where they start is never where they end. And his twists are some of the least expected twists I've ever come across. And he just has a really interesting perspective on science fiction. I'd say most of his stories are science fiction, and they just have their own tone and sensibility. They're not action stories. They're very much, based on moral quandaries or very weird situations. And again, he always has really great twists, which almost aren't even twists. They're such abrupt left turns that they're not even twists at that point. They're just, it's like the story starts over and it's something else. And ironically, I think I failed to deliver on that twist in my adaptation of his short story Utu, but I still really love the Utu short story itself. And so Ancestor is my recommendation. I highly recommend it. If it's your first time reading a Malachi book, it's a great place to start. You'll get a whole story, and you will be very I don't want to say confused, but you will be very, when you finish the book, you will not know how to feel. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or even think, for that matter. And so the unfortunately, yes, I have a weird allergy to wine, especially red wine. It makes me have a fever. I've never been able to figure it out because I can drink other alcohol. It's just wine, specifically red wine. I don't know if it's the sulfates, whatever. So anyway, I brought a beer. And so to go with, how strange this book is, I brought Delirium, which is one of the strongest, and it's a great beer, and it will destroy you.
It absolutely will. It takes about a half
very
a glass
high alcohol content. Yeah, it has these little pink elephants.
They both on the comic, the beer, they both destroy your brain. Let's put it that way.
That's right.
Yeah, it comes in this like beautiful clay like gray bottle, and it has all these little pink elephants.
That's awesome.
Which is what you'll see when you drink the whole bottle. You'll see lots of elephants floating around your head. So I thought that would be fitting to go with Ancestor.
Yeah, fantastic.
Beautiful.
And yeah, I think as a wine enthusiast, it's my duty to make sure I put this out there for those. But it's probably, especially if it's red wine is worse than other wines, but all wine tends to have more of this than anything else. It's histamines that wine has, and that's why allergies, it's literally an antihistamine when you take an allergy medicine. It's so if you drink wine and you are allergic to that, you're just like literally loading yourself up with everything you would take an allergy medicine to get rid of, to block against. So that's probably the and histamines are not. See, sulfites are in beer as well, but not histamines. That is a wine only thing. So that is probably your
That's probably it.
issue.
Yeah, because it messes me up.
We feel for you.
Yeah, I always feel left out. You know, wine, it looks good. Everyone talks about it. It has all these flavor profiles, and
you're in California, like it's so you're like, wow, everyone wants to go to all these wine tastings and wine countries, and it's like, where are the breweries, guys? Come on, distilleries, breweries. Let's do that.
Yeah, no, we all have curses, right? So
yeah, we do.
Indeed.
We do. Always. Well, you know what? Let's wrap this up with the last question I wanted to ask you. So you just showed us, obviously, Ancestor, but what would you say, and having read now essentially your body of comics work, actually, first question for you, is comics where you see creatively, like, are you in it for the long haul at this point? Is this something, like, outside of obviously you're doing editing, film work is something you're probably always going to be interested in, but is comics kind of your home base at this point, creatively?
Yeah, it is definitely now. In 2020, during the pandemic, I definitely made a conscious decision to steer away from film and more towards comics. If not for, the only reason being that I can go and make comics and I can't go and make movies. I don't have the money or resources or, I mean, you've seen the kind of stories I write, and you can imagine how hard those are to get financed because they're not cheap and they're quite niche, maybe. But at least the thing that I've always been told in Hollywood circles for over a decade is that my work may be good, but it's not commercial. And that's the thing that I've been butting up against, is this commerciality thing. Anyway, so yeah, I made, after 10 years of trying to get movies made and pitching and going out there and doing all that shit, from studio films to indie movies, everything up and down, I've realized that comics is a true heaven, where I get full creative control. I own my work. I can do anything I want. And most importantly, I can produce it and get it out into the world, which for me as a writer is the most important thing, is for the work to be received. It's one thing to write a story, but if no one reads it, it's it doesn't feel complete and you don't feel good about yourself. And so comics have been this amazing second chance in a way for me to tell stories, because film didn't quite work out the way I hoped it would. So we'll see. I mean, film is a question mark. We'll see what happens in the future. If Undying Love goes next year and is a big hit, that may drag me back into the film. Some of my other books are in development, but creatively and personally, I'm quite focused on books.
Well, film is such a waiting game. Like, it's funny, we commented on 7 years for the Kali graphic novel, but 7 years is nothing in the film world. Like, that's
12 years.
That's
on
like
the Undying Love movie.
That's a good average. Like, only 7 years. Hot damn.
Yeah.
That was a good run. Like, normally you're looking at, like, a lot of people comment on Barbie coming out, and that thing was in development for an insane amount of time before they could figure out what. I mean, like, Barbie as an IP has been around for forever. Don't kid yourselves. They were trying to make something out of it for as long as it's been around, and it just took them this long to actually find a way and stick to it and get it out the door. And it's always such a chance. So then the last question for you here today, in heat of the moment, top of your head, to your knowledge, 1 to 3 greatest influences on you as a storyteller.
Well, I'll go with the obvious one I already mentioned. More recently, Gene Wolfe has been a huge and it's actually really fun and cool to find such an inspiring influence this late in life. I think most of the time when you talk about your influences, it's the stuff you grew up on or the stuff you liked when you were younger, and it sticks with you. And so to find an author whose work not only blows me away and entertains me, but also opens my mind to what's possible with storytelling and the written word, has been really, really awesome. And so I'll put Gene Wolfe on there. 2 more.
Yeah,
I'll give
I
you
do
one
that
more.
too. Scan the
Yeah,
bookshelf.
Yeah. I'll give you one more author, because I just find that I mean, my personal love is like novels. That's the thing I love most, even though I work in film and comics. The thing I like most are books. And so another author who I one of my favorite and most influential and inspiring for me is Glenn Cook, who wrote a series called The Black Company.
Yes,
which is my favorite.
Read most of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 10-book series. There might even be an 11th book at this point. But that is probably my favorite single story. And
I mean, it's interesting because he's like a much pulpier version of Gene Wolfe, really, especially Black Company to like The New Sun. There's a very connected tone and thread between the two of them, but one's doing it much more like pulp action, you know, even though it's unique in its way. Like, you're not going to read a lot of pulp action that's like The Black Company, but I do see a nice connection between those two. That's
yeah. I mean, I would say that they're both like very grounded fantasy writers, and that they write fantasy stories from the ground. And so you're never going to get the king or the wizard or the important characters. Their story, especially Glenn Cook stories, are about the random soldier on the front line who's shaking in his boots, and it's about the day-to-day experience of these fantasy worlds and what they bring and the burdens that they lay on their characters versus these sweeping epic tales of, you know, heroics and this kind of thing. So
well, they always make fantasy worlds seem like medieval times, where it's like, no, it was dirty and disgusting and terrible. Like it wasn't the romance of the knight versus the dragon kind of a thing. It was not a great time for anybody. Yeah.
So they're both very grounded, and they both, I mean, Glenn Cook deals with a lot more magic than Gene Wolfe does, but they deal with things in a very, I mean, grounded is almost too simple a word to describe their sensibilities. And so
dirty is usually the word I think of for him.
Like
everything, like because even magic is like, it doesn't always work. The people aren't always that good at it. You know, they're all like, the people who do magic aren't better than any of the other people that are on the ground. Yeah, like there's something kind of dirty and filthy, dirty. Those are the words that keep coming to my mind when I think of it.
Yeah, I would say like both of their stories, the characters have like extreme fallibility. Even the heroes of these stories are like rarely right or good or like succeed. It's very much just about them dealing with things as opposed to succeeding. And so number 3, just to get out of the books, let's see, I could go with I'll go with my all-time favorite comic is probably Akira. So I'll go with Otomo, Katsuhiro Otomo. As being,
no one's going to disagree with that answer.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with that. And although a lot of the younger kids these days, they have never heard or read Akira. They barely don't even know the anime exists. So it might be time to remind people about how special and unbelievably phenomenal the Akira manga is.
Yeah, I was going to say, lucky them.
Yeah,
they get to discover it. Yeah.
I mean, it's just one of the greatest stories, and the art and just everything about the manga is unbelievable. So, I'll go with those 3.
Yeah.
All right.
Very good choice.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for being here today, Daniel.
Thanks,
once again,
Daniel.
guys, Birdking Volume 2 up for pre-order as we speak. I'll look up what the final order. Do you know what the final order cutoff is for that?
I believe it's coming up in September. So definitely pre-order. It's the biggest thing you can do to help indie creators outside of buying the books. So pre-orders really make a big difference in our print runs and in terms of, you know, stores being interested in the product. So
think of it as like opening weekend, for a movie. It's like yes, you can go see it. It helps that you go see it later, but it doesn't matter as much as, you know, for whatever reason the industries have decided this is what we care most about in pre-orders for comics. That is our opening weekend. Like, those are the numbers
weighted
really
heavily.
eyeballing. So
yeah. And then and Collie's out now, and and Raiders is out, so you guys can find those.
Raiders is out. You can even maybe hunt down some Burn the Orphanage if our talk about that what made it seem really intriguing. And Undying Love, the second half, is probably going to come out soonish. So take a look at the first half when you can. That's also by Image Comics, and you can find some trades floating about there. All right, Daniel. Thank you so much. It's been great chatting with you. Best of luck on Bird King Volume 2 pre-orders. And yeah, I'm sure our paths will cross in the future.
Thank you, guys. Cheers.
All right, bud.
Thank you. Cheers,
Take
cheers.
care.
I'm going to hold up the bottle.